You've probably seen the headlines. Chicago's dangerous. Chicago's a mess. Chicago's somewhere you cross off the list and replace with Nashville or Denver or literally anywhere else. And sure, a lot of people believed it. But here's the thing. The people doing the avoiding have mostly never set foot in the city. So let's talk about what's actually going on. Because tourists are avoiding Chicago. And here's what they're not telling you. The numbers don't lie, but the headlines do. Let's start with the actual data because that's where things get interesting. In 2024, Chicago welcomed 55.3 million visitors, a 6.5% increase over the previous year. International visitors topped 2 million for the first time since 2019. The total economic impact of tourism that year landed at $20.6 billion. That's not a city people are fleeing. That's a city people are coming back to. Now, did 2025 bring some turbulence? Yes. International visitors fell 3.6% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to the same period in 2024. But here's the context that rarely makes it into the conversation. That decline wasn't unique to Chicago. Tourism Economics, a respected travel forecasting firm, had initially projected an 8.8% increase in international visitors to the U.S. for 2025, then revised that to a 9.4% decline, a swing of nearly 18 percentage points. International travel to the United States fell 14% in March 2025 alone. Every major American city took a hit. What actually happened in Chicago while all this was supposedly going wrong? Leisure hotel room demand hit a record of 8.2 million room nights in 2025. Hotel room demand rose 2.3% in 2025, while the national average declined by 0.5%. Chicago went against the trend. It didn't collapse, it held, and in some areas it grew. So the story that gets told, that tourists are fleeing Chicago specifically, that the city is in some kind of downward spiral, doesn't quite match what the numbers are actually saying. What's really happening is a lot messier and more interesting than any single headline can capture. The crime reputation, where it comes from, and what it costs. Nobody's going to pretend Chicago doesn't have a crime problem in certain parts of the city. That's not the argument here. But there's a meaningful difference between what's true and what's being used to scare people away. Chicago's reputation for violence is, in large part, a media construction that goes back decades. The city's crime gets covered with a kind of breathless intensity that you don't see applied to other cities with comparable or worse numbers. Part of that is historical. Al Capone, Prohibition, the gangland era. It all seeped into the national imagination and never quite left. Today's reality is more nuanced. The Brookings Institution studied crime across Chicago and found that downtown accounted for just 6% of the citywide increase in property crime between 2019 and 2022, and less than 1% of the increase in violent crime. Less than 1%. That's the downtown where tourists stay, eat, walk, and visit museums. A Gallup poll found that Chicago was ranked the second most dangerous city in the country, yet the majority of respondents who held that view had never visited. That's a remarkable thing. People forming strong opinions about a place they've never seen based entirely on what they've absorbed from a screen. The neighborhoods that actually experience the city's most serious crime, areas on the west side and parts of the south side, are places tourists have no reason to visit and typically don't. The tourist corridors, the Loop, River North, Lincoln Park, the Gold Coast, the Magnificent Mile, these are well-patrolled, well-lit, and statistically among the safer parts of the city. I've lived in Chicago for over a decade. The tourist areas are pretty safe, especially during the day. Like any big city, just stay aware of your surroundings, one longtime resident put it plainly. In 2025, Chicago recorded a 22.1% drop in overall violent crime in the first 9 months of the year, leading the nation. Homicides fell by 33% in the first half of 2025, double the national average. The summer months of June, July, and August saw the lowest homicide rates in the city since 1965. None of that means the city is without problems. Crime on the CTA has been a concern, with violent incidents on the transit system having risen significantly over the past decade, concentrated at roughly 17 stations. Property crime categories like non-residential burglary rose in some periods. These are real issues that the city is still working through, and to pretend otherwise would be dishonest. but the version of Chicago that exists in the minds of people who've never been there, a war zone, a no-go zone, a city beyond saving, that city doesn't exist. The Brookings Institution, in a research brief examining crime across multiple American cities, was blunt about what the data showed. Downtown Chicago and equivalent urban cores in New York, Seattle, and Philadelphia are actually among the safest parts of their respective cities. The perception that danger is spreading outward from neighborhoods into downtown, a narrative that circulates heavily in media coverage, is largely at odds with where crime actually concentrates in the data. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker addressed it directly at Choose Chicago's annual meeting, saying that visitors to the city instantly see through the fog of that false narrative. He wasn't wrong. People who actually show up tend to update their expectations pretty quickly. The gap between reputation and reality in Chicago may be wider than in almost any other American city, and that gap has a cost, not just to the tourism industry, but to the tens of thousands of Chicagoans who work in hospitality, food service, retail, and the dozens of other industries that depend on visitors feeling comfortable enough to show up. The Windy City thing is not what you think. This is one of those things that's worth clearing up because it's been wrong for so long that it's basically become accepted fact. Most people assume Chicago is called the Windy City because of the weather. Gusts ripping off Lake Michigan, funneling between skyscrapers, knocking the hats off tourists in November. And yes, if you've stood on Michigan Avenue in January, you understand why that assumption exists. The cold there has a name. Locals have called it the Hawk for generations, a term documented in the Chicago Defender as far back as 1936. But the actual origin of Windy City has nothing to do with the weather. The nickname was coined as a political insult. In the 1870s and 1880s, Chicago and Cincinnati were fierce rivals in baseball, politics, and civic ambition. The term Wendy was used in the Cincinnati press to mock Chicago's boosters, who were seen as all brag and bluster. The phrase stuck, and then got a second life in 1893 when New York Sun editor Charles Dana took aim at Chicago's bid to host the world's Columbian Exposition, dismissing the city's ambitious promoters as too full of hot air to pull it off. Chicago pulled it off. The 1893 World's Fair was a massive success, and the city embraced the nickname anyway, which says something about Chicago's character. As for whether Chicago is actually windy, by NOAA measurements, it's not even in the top 10 windiest U.S. cities. Boston averages higher wind speeds. So does Amarillo, Texas. Dodge City, Kansas, beats Chicago handily. The Windy City isn't especially windy. It's just especially confident about itself, which, historically speaking, was the whole point. The architecture is not a side note. A lot of cities have a building or two worth looking at. Chicago has an entire discipline because of what happened here. The world's first skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, was built in Chicago in 1885, designed by William LeBaron Jenney using a steel frame construction that allowed for height previously impossible with traditional masonry. The city had burned to the ground in 1871 and rebuilt with a ferocity that changed the history of construction. Architects came from everywhere to experiment on its streets: Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham, Dankmar Adler, and what emerged was a school of design, the Chicago School, that influenced how cities everywhere would be built for the next century. Frank Lloyd Wright developed his prairie-style architecture in the Chicago suburbs during this same period, and a cluster of his buildings is still accessible to visitors in Oak Park, a short trip from the city. Today, visitors can take architecture boat tours along the Chicago River and see over 50 buildings spanning different eras of design in the course of a single afternoon. The tours regularly win recognition as one of the best tourist experiences in any American city, and for good reason. Seeing the city from the river gives you a sense of the architectural layers that isn't visible from street level. The Chicago Architecture Center on Michigan Avenue runs some of these tours and offers indoor exhibitions for those who prefer land to water. The skyscrapers themselves are worth noting. The Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower, held the title of tallest building in the world from 1973 until 1998. Its sky deck, 103 stories up, offers views that stretch into 4 states on a clear day, and its glass-floored ledge lets visitors stand on nothing but transparent panels with the city below their feet. The 875 North Michigan Avenue building, which most people still call the John Hancock Center, offers another skydeck option with views extending north along the lakefront. Millennium Park opened in 2004 and gave Chicago one of its most recognized modern landmarks, Cloud Gate. Claire, the giant reflective sculpture designed by British artist Anish Kapoor that Chicagoans immediately and permanently renamed the Bean. It weighs approximately 110 tons, stands 33 feet tall, and mirrors the skyline in a way that photographs can't quite do justice. It's also free to visit, which is more than most world-class attractions can say. The park itself, anchored by the J. Pritzker Pavilion on one end and the Lurie Garden on the other, is one of the better urban parks in the country and hosts free outdoor concerts during the summer months. For those willing to go slightly off the beaten path, the Wabash Arts Corridor in the Loop is an open-air gallery of large-scale murals spread across building facades and alleys, much of it created by students and artists affiliated with Columbia College Chicago. No admission, no crowds. Just public art at a scale that stops you mid-stride. The food scene is quietly world-class. Deep dish pizza is real, it's good, and it's completely optional. Chicago's food story is a lot bigger than that. And frankly, the deep dish is defining Chicago food narrative flattens something that's considerably more interesting. Chicago is also the city that gave the world the Chicago-style hot dog, a specific ritual involving a steamed poppy seed bun, a Vienna beef frank, yellow mustard, chopped white onions, bright green sweet pickle relish, tomato slices, a dill pickle spear, sport peppers, and a dash of celery salt. Ketchup is not included, and if you ask for it at a serious hot dog stand, you'll get a look. The hot dog functions as a sort of civic religion, and it's worth trying at least once at a place like the Wiener Circle on Clark Street, where the staff's willingness to trade insults with customers is part of the experience and has been for decades. It's loud, it's unapologetically Chicago, and it costs about the same as a gas station snack. That combination is surprisingly hard to beat. As of the 2025 Michelin Guide, Chicago is home to 22 Michelin-starred restaurants. Among them, Smith, which holds 3 Michelin stars and appeared at number 90 on the world's 50 best restaurants list in 2024. Alinea, led by chef Grant Achatz, is one of the most distinctive dining experiences in the United States. Think edible helium balloons and a dessert course that gets plated directly on the table. Kasama, a Filipino bakery and restaurant on Winchester Avenue that draws lines around the block on weekend mornings, was elevated to 2 Michelin stars in 2025. And Feld, a tasting menu restaurant in Ukrainian Village that opened in 2024, earned its first Michelin star and a Green Star for sustainable practices before it had even completed its first full year of business. This is a city that takes food seriously across the entire price spectrum. The West Loop and Fulton Market neighborhood, once the city's meatpacking district, has become one of the most concentrated blocks of serious restaurants in the country. Girl and the Goat, Avec, and a dozen other places worth traveling for are packed into a few walkable blocks. For something a little more under the radar, Pilsen on the city's Lower West Side is one of Chicago's most vibrant neighborhoods and one of its most affordable. The Mexican food there, including proper taquerias and spots doing regional Mexican cooking that doesn't show up anywhere near downtown, is worth the trip on its own. Little Village, sometimes called La Villita, extends that culinary range further. La Casa de Samuel is a family-owned institution there, with handmade tortillas and live music on Sundays. If you're the kind of person who cares about where the bread comes from and whether the fish was caught responsibly, Daisy's in Logan Square has won 2 Michelin Green Stars for its Midwest Italian farm-to-table approach. The restaurant's chef, Joe Frillman, works directly with local farmers. It's the kind of place that makes you feel slightly better about eating pasta. What the tourists who skip Chicago are missing. Chicago's lakefront is 18 miles of publicly accessible shoreline, one of the most unusual features of any major American city. Most world-class cities sit on water and then charge you to be near it. In Chicago, the entire lakefront is public by law. That was a deliberate decision made in the city's early development, pushed by figures like architect and city planner Daniel Burnham, whose 1909 plan of Chicago insisted that the lakeshore belonged to the people. Over a century later, it still does. Beaches, parks, running paths, bike trails, all of it open, all of it free. Oak Street Beach and North Avenue Beach are the most popular in summer, but the lakefront stretches far enough in both directions that you can usually find a quieter stretch if you know where to look. The Lakefront Trail runs 18 miles end to end and is one of the better urban bike paths in the country, with Lake Michigan on one side and the city's skyline gradually shifting on the other. Hyde Park, on the city's south side, is one of the most intellectually interesting neighborhoods in America. It's home to the University of Chicago, the Museum of Science and Industry, the largest science museum in the Western Hemisphere, and the DuSable Black History Museum and Education Center, which covers African American history with depth and seriousness. Barack Obama's home is in Hyde Park. The neighborhood shaped by his early years in Chicago politics is very much still there, and the community hasn't forgotten it. Wrigley Field has been standing since 1914, making it the second oldest Major League Baseball park still in use. Wrigleyville, the neighborhood surrounding it, is the kind of place that functions as a self-contained village on game days. Bars, restaurants, old brick apartment buildings with rooftop bleachers that overlook the field directly. The Dry House Museum in River North is one of Chicago's genuinely underappreciated gems. Housed in a Gilded Age mansion that belonged to banker Samuel Mayo Nickerson in the 1880s, it's a look at the decorative arts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries in a setting that feels almost impossibly intact. 17 types of marble in the main hall, a stained glass dome in the gallery. The $20 admission is one of the better deals in the city. For something that could only exist in Chicago, the Lincoln Park Conservatory hides a quiet pool at its north end that most visitors walk right past. Oz Park in Lincoln Park neighborhood is built around L. Frank Baum's connection to the city. He lived in Chicago when he wrote The Wizard of Oz, and is scattered with bronze statues of Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion. It's not something most travel guides lead with. That's exactly why it's worth mentioning. And then there's the Pedway, a network of underground tunnels connecting downtown buildings that most tourists never discover, partly because it isn't particularly well signed. In winter, it's how the locals move through the loop without putting on a coat. It's also occasionally home to public art installations and, if you know where to look, murals that most of the city has no idea exist. The political noise and what it actually costs. It would be incomplete to talk about Chicago's declining visitor numbers without acknowledging the political dimension, because it has been loud and it has had real effects. Since 2016, Chicago has been targeted repeatedly in political rhetoric, cited as an example of failed governance, out-of-control crime, and urban dysfunction. The city has been invoked as a cautionary tale so frequently that the name Chicago has, for a segment of the American public, become almost shorthand for urban failure. That has consequences for tourism. When a president repeatedly describes a city as dangerous and lawless, some portion of potential visitors absorb that message and adjust their plans. It doesn't matter that the data doesn't support it. It doesn't matter that most of the violence being referenced is concentrated in specific neighborhoods that tourists would never visit. The brand damage is real, even if the underlying claim isn't. What's interesting is what happens when people actually visit. Randy Stansick, general manager of Skydeck at Willis Tower, addressed the political noise head-on. You have to block some of the noise out. We're marathon runners, not sprinters. We've been through COVID. We've been through 9/11. We've been through many recessions. A lot of times you can paralyze yourself or find excuses not to move forward. Chicago's leisure travel record in 2025 suggests that people who do come tend to come back, and the word of mouth from actual visitors is considerably more generous than the coverage. Lois Matrone, a concierge at the Wade Hotel in Streeterville and vice president of the Chicago Hotel Concierge Association, said she hadn't seen an overall decline in visitors, though she was concerned about the long-term impact on international tourism specifically. The international dimension matters because of how tourists behave. International visitors typically stay longer, spend more, and visit a broader range of neighborhoods. They're also the segment most affected by the political climate around U.S. travel. Stricter border screening, shifting diplomatic relations, and the general sense that the welcome mat has been partially retracted. In the first quarter of 2025, international visitors to Chicago fell 3.6% year over year, and the city's aviation officials were candid about their concern. But here's the thing about Chicago that its history keeps demonstrating. It absorbs shocks and rebuilds. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 leveled the city. It came back and invented the skyscraper. The Prohibition era left a complicated legacy. It came back with the blues, jazz, and a food culture that eventually attracted Michelin inspectors. The 2008 financial crisis hit the city hard. It rebuilt its Fulton Market neighborhood into one of the best restaurant districts in the country. Even the COVID-19 pandemic, which devastated Chicago's hotel industry, demand dropped 73% in 2020, was followed by a sustained recovery that saw the city return to 55.3 million visitors by 2024. There is something almost stubborn about the way Chicago responds to adversity. It's not defiant in the way a city that's trying to prove something is defiant. It's more like a place that has seen enough cycles of reinvention that it doesn't particularly need validation from outside observers. That's either admirable or slightly irritating, depending on how you're wired. But it's been a consistent feature of the city's character for well over a century. The version of Chicago that makes for a good political talking point and the version of Chicago that actually exists are different places. The tourists who discover the real one tend not to regret the trip. The hidden city, things the brochures skip. There's a version of Chicago that the official tourism materials cover well. The Bean, the Art Institute, the Navy Pier, the architecture tour, deep dish pizza at Lou Malnati's. All of that is fine. Most of it is genuinely worth doing. But Chicago also has a second layer that rewards the visitor who stays a little longer or drifts a few blocks from the main drag. So Far Sounds operates in Chicago and hosts intimate concerts in unexpected locations. A chocolate shop, a rooftop, a gallery. The venue is revealed the day before the show. You don't know who's playing until you arrive. It's the opposite of buying tickets to a stadium tour. And it's produced some genuinely memorable evenings for people willing to surrender a bit of control over their plans. The Chicago Cultural Center on Michigan Avenue is a free architectural marvel that most out-of-towners walk right past on their way to something they paid to see. It was built in 1897 as the city's main public library, and its interior, particularly the two Tiffany glass domes, is extraordinary in a way that photographs don't quite capture. It now hosts rotating exhibitions, concerts, and events, and it costs nothing to walk in. On any given weekday, you can have most of it to yourself, which is either peaceful or slightly eerie, depending on the light. Ping Tom Memorial Park in Chinatown sits along the Chicago River and spans over 17 acres. It has a pagoda-style pavilion, kayak rentals along the river, beautifully maintained gardens, and views of the downtown skyline that most tourists never find because they assume Chinatown is just a dining destination and move on after the dumplings. For anyone who loves music that doesn't come with a corporate sponsor, Hungry Brain in Roscoe Village has been hosting live jazz, experimental music, and spoken word performances for years in a low-lit room with retro furnishings and a bring-your-own-food policy. It's the kind of bar that New York or Los Angeles would have lost to a condo development by now. Chicago managed to keep it. Sunday nights are jazz nights, and the drinks are strong enough that you'll want to pace yourself. The city's Magic Lounge in Edgewater is a full-service cocktail bar and theater dedicated entirely to magic, close-up card work, illusion shows, the whole thing. It's a niche that Chicago somehow decided to take seriously, and the result is a reservation-required evening that's genuinely unlike anything most visitors have done before. Montrose Point Bird Sanctuary, near the lakefront, has a section locals call the Magic Hedge, a dense tree line that acts as a stopover during bird migration season. Bird watchers show up from considerable distances during spring and fall to see species that are passing through. It's free, it's peaceful, and it's one of those places that makes a city feel larger than it looks on a map. The honest picture. Chicago is not the city it's been made out to be in bad faith political rhetoric. It's also not a city without problems. That's the honest position, and most Chicagoans will tell you the same thing if you ask them straight. Crime is real, but highly concentrated, and it does not define the experience of being a tourist in this city's central neighborhoods. The financial and political headwinds facing Chicago's tourism industry in 2025 and into 2026 are real, but driven largely by factors that have nothing to do with Chicago specifically. Shifts in international travel patterns, the broader U.S. political climate, and economic uncertainty that affects the entire country. Kristen Reynolds, the CEO of Choose Chicago, put it plainly: "It's very difficult to know in the global economy what the future holds, but we're in a strong place." What Chicago has going for it is substantial. World-class architecture, one of the best food cities in the United States by any serious measure, a free public lakefront that almost no other American city can match, a blues and jazz heritage that produced musicians who changed popular music everywhere, and neighborhoods with enough cultural depth to sustain a week of serious exploration. Chicago has more than 77 official community areas, each with its own character. Most visitors see 3 or 4 of them. The ones they miss often turn out to be the ones they wish they'd found. The city's summer festival calendar is worth noting on its own. Lollapalooza has taken place in Grant Park every August for decades. The Taste of Chicago, held annually in July, bills itself as the world's largest food festival. The Chicago Air and Water Show runs in August and draws crowds to the lakefront to watch aerial displays over Lake Michigan. These events pull hundreds of thousands of visitors each year and represent a kind of civic confidence. The idea that a city this large can fill its public spaces with something worth gathering for. The people who avoid Chicago based on headlines are making a decision based on an incomplete picture. The people who show up tend to find something they didn't quite expect: a city with real edges, genuine character, and a habit of proving the skeptics wrong. It's been doing that since 1893, when Charles Dana told the world it couldn't build a World's Fair. It built one. The city hasn't changed that much. That's what they're not telling you. If this gave you a different angle on Chicago, or if it confirmed something you already suspected, share it with someone who could use the real picture. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Have you been to Chicago, and did the reality match what you'd heard? We read everything.